Have you ever felt like you were being watched, in your own home? Like even when you're alone, someone might still be seeing you, all the time. It's a strange, unsettling feeling. Hard to explain. But that's exactly what I went through, And it all started with a gift. Getting a present from your granddaughter is always heartwarming, right? A sweet gesture. A sign that she's thinking of you. She said it was something modern, something that would make my daily life easier and safer. Of course, I accepted it with that smile of someone who feels deeply loved. I mean, who wouldn't accept a gift from someone so special? But what I didn't know, and maybe you don't either, is that some gifts come with more than just technology. They come with control, with surveillance, with the creeping realization that someone might be watching your every move, even when they're not in the room. At first it was just a little device, small, harmless looking. She installed it so carefully, told me it was for my safety, just to check in and make sure everything was okay. It's because I love you, Grandma, she said, and I believed her. How could I not? But over time, things started to feel off. She knew when I got up from the couch. She knew what time I went to bed, what I was watching on TV, even when I forgot the kettle on the stove, that it felt like she was right there in the room with me, even though she was miles away. And that's when the question started keeping me up at night. At what point does care turn into intrusion? It may sound dramatic, but think about it. You're sitting in your own living room, the same space filled with decades of memories. And you slowly realize there are invisible eyes there. Your freedom begins to fade, replaced by suspicion, by silence, by the constant feeling of being watched, even when you've done nothing wrong. Have you ever been through something like this? Felt like love came wrapped in control? Stick with me until the end, because what I'm about to share may truly surprise you. We're going to talk about something most people avoid: the privacy of elderly people, the way technology is used as a safety net, and the blurry line between love, concern, and overreach. This story is more common than you might think. In a world where cameras, smart devices, and sensors are everywhere, what used to be a space of comfort and autonomy can quickly become one of surveillance. And when this comes from someone in your own family, a child, a granddaughter, someone you love with all your heart, it becomes even more painful to navigate, because yes, the intention might be good, but does that make the constant monitoring okay? Does safety have to cost us our independence? These are tough questions, and many families avoid them. It's easier to say it's for your own good, but is it really? I'm not here to blame anyone. I'm here to tell you what happened to me, to open this conversation, and maybe help you understand your own situation, whether you're the one being cared for, or the one trying to care. And it wasn't until I found out completely, by accident, what was really going on, that everything changed. But before we get to that, let me tell you how things started to spiral out of control. It all began to feel like a slow unraveling of something I couldn't quite name. I wasn't angry, not at first. Confused, maybe, a little uneasy. But the truth is, I didn't want to believe that someone I loved so deeply, someone que no meu colo, pudesse estar me invadindo assim, mesmo que sem intenção. That's the part that hurt the most. Not the technology, not the camera itself, but the quiet realization that my trust had been crossed without a single conversation. I started questioning everything. Was this really about protection? Or was it about control? And if it was about love, why didn't she ask me first? Why did I have to find out by accident, like it was some kind of secret? That moment, the one where everything clicked, stays with me. I was moving a flower pot to dust under the shelf when I noticed a tiny blinking light, something I'd never seen before. I leaned in, looked closer, and then I froze. I'm telling you this because maybe, just maybe, you've been through something similar, or maybe you're afraid it could happen. Maybe someone gave you a gift that came with strings attached, or maybe you're the one trying to help, and now you're wondering if you crossed a line without realizing it. If any part of this story resonates with you, I'd really love to know. Seriously, leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever felt your privacy was taken without permission, even by someone you trust? Or maybe you've been on the other side and thought you were doing the right thing. This space here, this community we're building, it's not just mine, it's ours. Your voice might be the one that helps someone else feel less alone, less confused. So take a second and share. I read everything, and every comment helps abrir ese diálogo que tanta gente evita. And hey, If this conversation has stirred something in you, if it made you think twice or feel seen, don't forget to like this video. That one small action tells the platform this matters. This story is worth hearing. And more importantly, it tells me I should keep showing up here to share more of these real stories that provoke, that touch deeply. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. With truths that are not always said, but that need to be heard. So if you want to continue walking this path with me, through the tough conversations, the personal stories, the moments that challenge and connect us, hit that subscribe button. It's how we stay together. It's how this journey keeps going. And trust me, where this story goes next, it only gets more intense. It was beautifully wrapped, with a small handwritten tag that read, "For you, Grandma, so you're never alone." That alone was enough to make my heart swell. I held the box carefully, already imagining something como porta-retratos digital. Talvez uma caixinha de som com mensagens gravadas, menos aquelas coisinhas que nos fazem sentir lembrados. When I opened it, there was this sleek, modern-looking smart device inside. At first glance, it looked like one of those voice assistants. You know, the ones that answer questions, play music, remind you of appointments. It even had a soothing startup sound when I plugged it in. My granddaughter beamed with pride and explained how it could help me with my routines. "It'll make your life easier," she said. "You can ask it anything, and it listens to you. It's like company for when you're alone." And, honestly, in the beginning, it was kind of nice. I'd wake up and say good morning, and it would respond with the weather forecast. I could ask it to play old songs, and suddenly the living room would fill with Nat King Cole and Billie Holiday. It even reminded me to drink water and take my pills, which, let's be real, was actually helpful. But then came the manual, a thick little booklet that didn't look like something meant for a simple speaker. There were instructions about syncing accounts, creating access permissions, enabling remote features, and Wi-Fi. It needed full-time connection. Again, nothing strange. We live in a connected world, right? Still, there was something about it that made me feel watched. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way it would light up randomly, or how sometimes I'd be in another room and hear it click as if waking up from sleep. I remember once, while I was on the phone with a friend, it suddenly spoke up, saying it didn't understand the question, but I hadn't asked anything. We laughed, brushed it off. "These gadgets are listening too much these days," she said, and yet, that little moment stayed with me, because something had shifted. That initial feeling of warmth, of having received something thoughtful, slowly started turning into something colder, more calculated. I began noticing patterns, like the day I mentioned feeling tired to a neighbor, and hours later, my granddaughter called and said, "You need to rest more, Grandma. I heard you were feeling off today." I hadn't told anyone else, and no one else had been around. That's when I started putting the pieces together. The device wasn't just a gift, it was a gateway into my home, my habits, my silence. I started reading more carefully, learning about features like ambient sound monitoring, real-time access to audio, video pairing with smart cameras, and then came the discovery, hidden deep in the settings, a paired account, her name, right there. Full access, that it wasn't malicious. I don't believe that, but it was invasive. And it made me realize how thin the line has become between connection and control, between protection and intrusion. What shocked me most wasn't even the technology, it was the mindset, the quiet assumption that just because someone is older, they must need constant supervision, that being cared for also means being watched, that decisions about our autonomy can be made without us, all in the name of love. And that's what truly stirred something in me, because I know I'm not the only one. There are thousands, maybe millions of older people out there receiving similar gifts, devices that arrive under the wrapping of affection, but operate like silent observers, and many don't even know it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the real question isn't just about privacy or devices, it's about how we define dignity, how we draw boundaries inside the home, even with those we love. It's about understanding that safety without consent is just another form of control, and that maybe what's disguised as concern could be a sign of something we all need to talk more about, the fear of aging, and how younger generations respond to it with technology instead of honest conversation. So now, I want to take you into the next part of this story, the part where I confront the truth, not just about the gift, but about what it revealed. But before we go there, tell me something. Have you ever received a gift that made you feel more monitored than loved? Write it down in the comments. Even a simple that makes sense to me helps criar esse espaço de troca. Sometimes, the most personal stories are the ones that connect us all the most. It started with little things, small comments, questions that didn't quite make sense unless she had heard something. Did you manage to rest after that loud thunderstorm this afternoon, Grandma? She asked once on a call. I paused. How did she know about that? The rain had started abruptly. I had been talking to myself about how loud it was, just out loud in the living room, like I often do when I'm alone. But I hadn't called her. I hadn't told anyone. Another time, I went for a short walk to the corner bakery. When I got home, the phone rang. You left your door unlocked again, she said, gently but firmly. You really need to be more careful. That chilled me a little. I hadn't mentioned anything, and she doesn't live nearby. The bakery's 5 minutes away. How would she know? At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was just guessing, maybe it was coincidence. But coincidences don't pile up like that. And slowly, a strange pattern began to form, like background music I hadn't noticed until it got louder. There's something about realizing that someone knows details about your day that you didn't share. Not the big stuff, not the obvious things, but the private moments, the silent routines, the in-between. That's when the boundary between care and control starts to blur. Because suddenly, your solitude doesn't feel like solitude anymore. It feels like surveillance. I remember sitting on the couch one evening, staring at that device glowing faintly on the shelf, and wondering, what else does it hear? What has it recorded? Who else has access to it now, besides me? You know, when you've spent a lifetime building your independence, even the smallest crack in your privacy feels like an earthquake. And it's not about hiding anything. It's about owning your silence, your space, your right to not be watched. That's a kind of dignity that technology sometimes forgets to respect. And let me be honest, I believe her intentions were good. I believe she was trying to protect me, to be close even when far. That's the story I've told myself over and over again. But intention doesn't erase impact. Even love, when it ignores consent, becomes invasive. The mental shift came, slowly and painfully. I started noticing how often I held back from singing while cooking, how I'd check over my shoulder before muttering to myself, how I hesitated before making certain calls in the living room. My home, my sanctuary was becoming a stage, not because of what I was doing, but because of the question that wouldn't leave me. Who's watching now? And there it was, the truth hidden in plain sight. When we label control as concern, we disguise a deeper fear. Fear of losing those we love, fear of helplessness, fear of not being able to respond in time. But we can't let fear dictate the boundaries of other people's freedom. So many elderly people are treated like children again, like they need to be monitored, managed, protected at all costs. But we are not fragile objects. We are not helpless souls waiting to be supervised. We are people, with stories, with wisdom, with voices, and those voices deserve respect, not tracking. The emotional weight of this realization doesn't come all at once. It comes in waves. Each time you notice that what once felt like love, now feels like oversight. And it raises bigger questions, ones we rarely ask out loud. Questions like, who decides what's best for someone? When does care become control? And how do we talk about these things without hurting the people we love most? That's what this story has become for me, not just a tale about a device or a granddaughter's decision, but about truths we hide under the name of protection. About the silent compromises we're asked to make, just to make others feel safe, and most of all, about the dignity that comes from being trusted, even when we're vulnerable. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because behind every small moment of surveillance, there's a larger story about how we treat the elderly, how we define autonomy, and how we face the uncomfortable tension between love and control. So, if any part of this made you stop and think, if you've ever felt the line between affection and overreach blur in your own life, I want to hear from you. Type it right now in the comments. This makes sense to me. Because sharing these thoughts is how we start changing the way we talk about privacy, care, and respect, not just for the elderly, but for everyone. What a strange place to find yourself in, between gratitude and discomfort. Between knowing that someone loves you so much they'd do anything to protect you, and realizing that anything might have crossed a line you never agreed to. That's the emotional tightrope I found myself walking. And maybe, just maybe, you felt that too. Because when love turns into watchfulness, and watchfulness starts feeling like surveillance, something precious begins to shift. The meaning of care becomes blurry. It starts wearing a different face. One that doesn't always ask first. One that assumes, decides, acts all in the name of protection, but often without consent. You see, the most complicated part of all this is that it never starts with bad intentions. It begins with love, with fear, with memories of the time grandma slipped and didn't tell anyone, with that headline about someone's elderly parent wandering off and getting hurt, with a sense of duty mixed with anxiety, and slowly, gently, the "I want to make sure you're okay" becomes "I need to know where you are all the time." And that's where the transformation happens, from care to control, from presence to pressure, from support to surveillance. But here's the truth I had to sit with. Just because something is done out of love doesn't make it automatically right. We can mean well and still cause harm. We can give a gift like a device that's supposed to help, and not realize we've also taken something in return. And that something is trust, space, autonomy. I started asking myself hard questions, ones I had avoided before. Like, do I really have the right to say no? Or will I be seen as ungrateful, uncooperative, maybe even reckless if I resist? At what point does caring become a form of quiet control? These are the invisible tensions that build up in family relationships, especially between generations. Because we don't talk about boundaries in aging. We don't always ask what kind of care the elderly want. We just assume they need it. We step in, we decide, we override, and sometimes that's necessary. I'm not ignoring that. There are moments when safety requires action. But the bigger question, the one we often avoid, is this. When we take charge, are we doing it for them or for us? Because there's a difference between keeping someone safe and keeping ourselves from feeling fear, guilt, or helplessness. This is where the mental shift needs to happen. We have to rethink what true care looks like. We need a new mindset, one that balances protection with respect, guidance with permission, love with listening, because real love doesn't assume. It asks, it includes, it adapts. It allows the other person, no matter their age, to remain the main character in their own life. There was a moment, not long ago, when I sat down with my granddaughter and asked her a simple question. Do you trust me to tell you when I need help? Her eyes welled up. I think she hadn't even realized how far she had gone in trying to shield me from every possible risk. She thought she was being strong for me. In reality, she was slowly chipping away at the independence I'd spent decades building. And maybe that's the hardest part of this journey, realizing that sometimes, in the name of love, we start solving problems that don't exist yet. We try to protect people from futures that haven't happened, and in doing so, we create new problems, resentment, silence, disconnection. What's needed isn't just a device-free room or a boundary set in stone, it's dialogue, mutual decisions. It's sitting down and saying, here's what I need. What do you need? Because relationships built on respect don't just work better, they feel better. They bring peace, not tension, trust, not suspicion. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding where that line is, the one between loving someone and managing their life, is one of the most important decisions we'll ever face in our families. It requires emotional maturity. It requires empathy, patience, and the willingness to let go of control, even when it feels risky. So, if you've ever felt like you're being watched more than you're being seen, write in the comments, that hits home for me. Let's keep this conversation alive. Because what we're talking about here isn't just about privacy, it's about how we honor the people we love. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic. Because what people don't often say, and maybe don't even realize, is how being watched all the time changes the way you feel on the inside. It changes the way you act, the way you think, the way you exist. It's not just about the device on the shelf, the app on the phone, or the notification on the watch. It's about what all of that does to your mind and your heart. It's about that invisible weight that slowly starts settling in, quietly, as if it doesn't matter. But it does. At first, I thought it was just me, that I was overreacting. Maybe just a natural adjustment. But over time, I started to notice a pattern. Small decisions I used to make freely now came with a second thought. Will they see this? Will they ask why I did that? Will they think I'm not being careful enough? That's when I realized that feeling growing inside me wasn't safety, it was surveillance. And more than that, it was the constant doubt of being evaluated. Surveillance changes you, it pushes you into a place where you start measuring every step. Spontaneity hides. Authenticity takes a step back. And in its place, a filtered version of yourself starts to appear. One that exists to please, to not worry anyone, to avoid causing trouble. But is that really living? Or is it just silently surviving? The anxiety crept in subtly. First, it was occasional insomnia. Then, that constant feeling of being late for something, even when there was nothing scheduled. A restlessness in my chest, as if someone was always expecting something from me. A response, a behavior, a confirmation that I was okay. The strangest part is that no one said anything directly. There were no orders, no demands. But the constant presence of those eyes, even digital ones, created this atmosphere of quiet judgment. And here's the hidden truth that no one talks about when it comes to this kind of care. It can isolate you. It can make you feel alone, even when you're surrounded by people. Because what's supposed to be presence starts to feel like pressure. What's supposed to be support begins to feel like a daily test to prove you're still capable. The emotional impact runs deep. You start doubting your own choices, hesitating before doing even the simplest things like going out for a walk or choosing a time to rest. As if every action needed approval before being lived. And the cruelest part, it's all in the name of your own safety. Look at that paradox. When care doesn't respect your individuality, it becomes a constant performance, like you have to prove every single day that you're still trustworthy. This kind of disguised surveillance affects your self-esteem directly. Little by little, you begin to wonder, do I really know what's best for me? Am I overreacting? Am I no longer capable? And that chips away at your autonomy, weakens your confidence, and shakes your soul. Because when care doesn't come with listening, it becomes noise. And when it doesn't come with space, it becomes a cage. And you know what scared me the most? How naturally it all happened. No one woke up and said, "Today I'm going to start controlling your life." It just happened. One device here, one reminder there, one check-in at the end of the day, and before I knew it, my routine wasn't just mine anymore. My conversations weren't so private. My home wasn't entirely free. And worse, my freedom had turned into a privilege, not a right. But maybe the most important part of this entire journey was understanding that the transformation we need isn't just technological, it's emotional. It's about our relationships, about starting the conversations we've been putting off for fear of hurting someone. But those conversations need to happen. Because behind every "I just want to protect you," there might be a deeper "I don't know how to deal with the fear of losing you." And that's where the key lies, in having the courage to name that fear, to look at it, to recognize that loving also means trusting. And maybe you're going through something similar. Maybe you've noticed the same signs, the same emotions, the same doubts. So I want to invite you to share that here with me, and with everyone else who's also on this path. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Let's keep going with this conversation. There's still so much more to uncover. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this is where things really start to get complicated. Not because of the technology itself, but because of the people it involves. Behind all the discomfort, the feeling of being watched, the quiet pressure, there's someone we love. Someone who probably acted with the best intentions. And that's exactly what makes it so hard. When care starts to feel like control, when love begins to resemble surveillance, how do you bring that up without hurting the other person, without sounding ungrateful, without making the gap between you even wider? It took me a while to admit it, but the hardest part wasn't the device itself, or even the constant monitoring. It was the fear of bringing it up with her, my granddaughter. This sweet girl who has always treated me with so much affection, who grew up seeing me as a role model, who now worries about me as if I'm the one who suddenly can't be trusted to take care of myself. And maybe I do need some support, I'm not denying that. But does it have to be like this? Does it have to come wrapped in this constant sense that every move I make is being recorded, reviewed, corrected? There were days I rehearsed how to bring it up. I'd go over it in my head, trying to find a way to say it without sounding like I was rejecting her gift, or her intentions, or her love. Because I know, and I still believe, that for her, this was an act of love. She just wanted to make sure I was okay, that I had someone looking out for me, that I wasn't alone. But how do I explain that? Even with all that in mind, I feel suffocated. That this care is taking something from me, something I deeply value, my space, my freedom, my right to live without needing to justify every little thing. And trying to put that into words feels like walking on a tightrope. There's such a big risk of sounding unfair. The fear of hurting her feelings is huge. How do I tell someone who grew up in a different time, with different values, that what feels like protection to them feels like imprisonment to me? How do we build a bridge over a generational gap that's not just about age or technology, but about the meaning of respect, autonomy, and love? I realize that most of this gap is built not out of years or gadgets, but out of silence. Out of all the conversations we never had, the questions we didn't ask, the feelings we've swallowed just to keep the peace. Because there's a mutual fear here, her fear of losing me, and my fear of losing her if I tell her how I truly feel. It's a quiet game of compromise where no one wants to be the bad guy. But everyone ends up feeling a little hurt. And this is the most delicate part, the emotional, human side that no instruction manual or tech support guide will ever cover. It's the real behind the scenes of this relationship. Me, trying to hold on to my independence. Her, trying to hold on to me. And in between all that, a bunch of unsaid words. A loving gesture that unintentionally crossed a line. A lack of honest dialogue that weighs more than any tracking device ever could. Maybe the real challenge here isn't about tech. Maybe it's about the mindset transformation it demands. Because the world changes, the tools change, the risks change, but our ability to talk openly, to set boundaries, to listen, to really see one another, that still needs work. And we're not always ready for that. We don't always know how to start that kind of conversation without sounding critical. Or worse, like we're rejecting someone's love. I'm still figuring it out, still learning how to find that balance between accepting help and saying, I appreciate this, but I also need space to be myself, because that line is thin, and so often, the person crossing it doesn't even realize it, not out of disregard, but out of love, deep, overwhelming love. And when that love shows up in excess, it can start to feel heavy instead of comforting. There's a hidden truth here that no one likes to admit. Love, when unbalanced, can turn into pressure. And if we don't have the courage to talk about that, even if it's hard, even if we stumble, even if we're scared, the relationship starts to collect tension. It gets awkward. It loses its softness. Type in the comments, I'm on this journey too, because these conversations matter. There's still so much more to uncover, and that's exactly why we're not stopping here. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because there's a truth that many people avoid confronting. A truth I carry with me every single day. Aging doesn't mean disappearing. It doesn't mean becoming a spectator of your own life, or giving up your autonomy just because your hair has turned white. And yet, that's often what's expected of us. That we express gratitude for every bit of help. That we accept every form of interference as a blessing. That we keep quiet in the face of any decision imposed on us in the name of care. As if being older meant we should be thankful for simply being considered. But I need to say this, with all due respect, and from the perspective of someone who's lived a long life, freedom is still sacred. And just because the body changes, or new vulnerabilities appear, that doesn't mean the desire for independence goes away. In fact, in many cases, it grows stronger, because you begin to feel time differently. You understand that every decision, no matter how small, holds deeper meaning. Choosing what to wear, what to eat, when to go out or stay in, all of it becomes a silent symbol of the fact that we are still here, present, whole, in charge of our own stories. And when something or someone starts to interfere with those choices, even with the best of intentions, the impact is real, and often painful, because it's not just about what was done, but about what it represents, how it shakes our sense of identity, our authority over our own lives. Aging, to me, isn't about giving up control. It's about learning how to use it more consciously. It's about looking back and recognizing the value of every step. It's knowing that every wrinkle tells a story, every scar has a name, every silence holds a decision. Of course, we want companionship. Of course, the love and presence of family means something. Of course, kindness moves us. But one thing shouldn't erase the other. It is absolutely possible to care without invading, to love without smothering, to be close without taking over. That's true in every stage of life, but in old age, that balance becomes even more delicate, because there's a subtle yet persistent social tendency to treat the elderly as if they've lost the ability to decide, as if age automatically equals helplessness. And I reject that with all I have. I'm a woman. I'm a grandmother. I'm a daughter. I've been a mother of young children. I've been a working professional, a wife, a homemaker. I've lived through so many versions of myself, and every one of them still lives inside me. I didn't stop being who I am just because time passed. On the contrary, with each phase, with each transformation, I've gained more layers, more understanding, more depth, and that's exactly why my voice deserves to be heard. My choices deserve to be respected. My autonomy deserves to be honored. This is a conversation that goes far beyond technology. It speaks to mindset, to how often under the banner of protection, there lies an invisible structure that quietly erases our presence, that slowly strips away the right to try, to fail, to change our minds, and before we know it, we find ourselves constantly explaining why we left the house, why we didn't answer the phone, why we left the light on, as if living had turned into a daily test we must pass. But we don't need to prove anything. We just need to exist, to be, to continue being who we are, with all our imperfections, yes, but also with all our wisdom. Because if there's one thing time teaches us, it's that freedom is not begged for, it's built. And each of us has the right to keep building it until our very last breath. Yes, there are specific situations, moments, where more direct support is needed. Every story has its nuances. But that doesn't change the principle. Respect comes before any tool. Before the GPS, the camera, the phone alert, before the rules, before the worry disguised as control. And respect starts with listening, truly listening, without correcting, without interrupting, without turning the conversation into a lecture about what's best for you. Because no one knows what's best for us better than we do. That's not arrogance. It's experience. It's awareness. And that's true for everyone, no matter their age. Autonomy is a value that transcends generations. And when it's denied to someone simply because they're older, what we're really saying, even without realizing it, is that their life has lost value, that they no longer have something meaningful to contribute, that they don't need to think for themselves anymore. And honestly, that's one of the cruelest ways to erase someone. But here's what many don't realize. When we strip autonomy from the elderly, we're also stealing something from ourselves. The chance to learn, to hear stories that aren't in any book, to witness how a real life is built on real decisions, even when the world tells you otherwise. There is a profound wisdom in those who have lived, a silent kind of strength that doesn't demand, but transforms everything around it. And if we don't have the sensitivity to value that, we lose something irreplaceable. We lose the connection. That's why, more than discussing technology, we need to question how we perceive aging. Because aging isn't a flaw to be corrected. It's not a problem to be monitored. It's a chapter of the journey, a phase just as rich as any other, full of lessons, discoveries, fresh starts, and above all, full of decisions that are still ours to make. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Because only with genuine listening can we begin to build relationships grounded in respect, and this is just the beginning. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because between the need for protection and the desire for freedom, there is a space, a kind of middle ground, that too often goes unexplored, a space where respect and care don't cancel each other out, but walk side by side. That space exists. And the truth is, it doesn't require anything extraordinary, just honesty, and a real willingness to listen without assuming control. It begins with something so simple, yet so powerful, a conversation that's not one-sided. Because when we treat technology as the villain, we miss the bigger picture. The problem isn't the device, the app, the smart speaker, the GPS in the watch. The problem is when all of this is installed without dialogue, when it arrives wrapped in the label of safety, but is actually operating without consent. That's when it crosses the line. Not because of what the technology does, but because of what it silently takes away: the right to choose, the right to be informed, the right to decide how far care should go. Imagine if, instead of surprises that monitor, we received conversations that include, "Grandma, I found this device. It can help in case you need anything. What do you think about trying it out together?" That alone changes everything, because it invites us into the decision, into the experience, into the responsibility. It transforms what could feel like control into cooperation. It's not about removing tools. It's about using them with ethics, with awareness, with humanity. No one wants to be watched, but everyone wants to feel safe. These aren't opposites, they just need boundaries. And boundaries are not walls, they're bridges. When agreed upon by both sides, what kind of information is being shared, with whom, in what situations, what alerts are necessary, and which ones just feed anxiety. These aren't tech questions, they're relationship questions. And when we bring them to the table, we take the first step toward building real trust. Because let's be honest, if I need to hide how I feel, if I'm afraid of being seen as difficult, or of hurting someone who just wants to help, then we're not really communicating. We're negotiating silence. And silence doesn't protect, it isolates. That's why it's so important to create an environment where the elderly feel safe enough to say no. Or that's too much, or even can we try a different way? Without guilt, without drama, without being dismissed. It's easy to say we're doing something out of love, but love, when mature, listens. It adjusts. It asks permission. It doesn't assume. Because every person, regardless of age, deserves to be part of the decisions that affect their life. This might sound obvious, but if we look closer, how many decisions are being made about the elderly instead of with them? The real transformation begins when we replace control with collaboration, when we stop managing people and start empowering them. When a daughter says, "I want to help, but I also want to understand your limits." When a grandson says, "This tech could help you, but only if you're comfortable with it." When the message is not, "You need this, but does this make you feel more confident?" That's where dignity lives. In the details, in the consent, in the pauses that allow for real answers. Because we're not talking about machines, we're talking about lives, real stories, real fears, real needs. And sometimes, all it takes is one honest conversation to shift everything. I remember once, after a particularly tense moment around a new app that was tracking my steps and location, I asked my granddaughter a simple question. "What exactly are you afraid of?" She paused. She looked at me with eyes full of love and worry and said, "That something will happen and I won't be there to help." That was the moment the wall broke. Because then I could say, "I understand. But you being able to see where I am every second doesn't stop things from happening. What gives me peace is knowing we talk. That you trust I'll call if I need to. That you respect when I want to walk alone. That we can build safety together, not through fear, but through connection." It wasn't about turning off everything. It was about turning on the dialogue, about using the tools in a way that supported me, not surveilled me, about setting limits that made sense for both of us. That's when tech stopped being a burden and became something neutral again. Not a symbol of control, but a resource we could both agree on. And that's the heart of this conversation. Consent turns everything. It's what separates help from imposition, what turns a gift into a gesture of freedom instead of a chain. When someone asks, before installing, before activating, before configuring, what they're really saying is, "I see you." And being seen is what keeps us alive inside, especially in old age, where invisibility creeps in from many directions. When people speak over us, decide for us, explain things to us as if we're children, or worse, avoid the conversation altogether so we don't get upset. But we do get upset, only silently, and silence becomes a weight we carry alone. But when the dialogue is open, when choices are offered instead of imposed, when fears are shared instead of masked, that's when both sides can breathe again. Because yes, there is a middle ground. It doesn't come from a perfect manual or a high-tech gadget. It comes from presence, from listening, from the humility to ask instead of assume, from the courage to say, "Let's figure this out together." It's not about abandoning protection, it's about redefining it, making it something that strengthens identity, rather than erasing it. There's immense power in being part of our own safety. It transforms the experience. It brings clarity. It brings peace. And peace is never built through force. It's built through respect. Write in the comments, "I'm on this journey to," because the more we recognize each other's voices, the closer we get to relationships where care and freedom walk hand in hand. And from here, there's still something essential we need to explore together. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because the truth is, my story isn't rare. It may have its own details, its own rhythms, its own particular expressions of love and fear, but at the core, it's a melody that plays in many homes, behind many closed doors. Stories like this are unfolding right now, in silence, across living rooms, hospital waiting rooms, dinner tables where glances replace conversations, where someone is being watched for their own good, and someone else is afraid to ask, "Is this what you really want?" Maybe it's a smart speaker installed without asking. Maybe it's a camera pointing toward the hallway. Maybe it's a phone call every hour, not out of love, but out of control masked as worry. Or maybe it's just a gesture, a tone, a well-intentioned reminder that says more about fear than care. The scenarios vary, but the emotional blueprint is frighteningly familiar. Because this isn't about technology, it's about relationships. And relationships, especially across generations, are built on invisible negotiations we rarely name. I've had so many people, friends, acquaintances, even strangers tell me things like, "I wish I had the courage to say what I really felt when my daughter installed that app." Or, "My grandson tracks my steps because he says it helps him sleep better, but I don't sleep at all knowing I'm being observed." These are not rare outbursts. These are quiet truths, hidden behind smiles, family lunches, polite silences, and if we don't open space to talk about them, we keep feeding a cycle where love and control blur into one another. That's why it's so important to name what we're living. Because when we do, we realize we're not alone. That feeling of walking on eggshells, of not wanting to offend the people who care for you, but still wishing, deep inside, that they would ask more and decide less. That feeling is shared by many, and this collective experience holds power. The power to shift perspectives, to open a space where both sides, those who protect and those being protected, can speak with vulnerability, not defense. This is not about blaming families, it's about understanding the mentalities that shaped us. Many of our children were taught to be responsible for us instead of with us. They carry the weight of wanting to do everything right, to prevent, to protect, to anticipate, but in doing so, they sometimes forget that autonomy doesn't have an expiration date, that dignity isn't something we age out of, that safety is meaningful only when it's shared, not imposed. And I wonder, how many stories are out there, right now, like mine? How many grandmothers are smiling through discomfort? How many elderly men and women are nodding in agreement at decisions they never really got to consider? How many caregivers are doing everything they can, but without realizing they've silenced the very voices they meant to honor? It's a complex dance, and there's no villain here. But there is a truth we need to name. We can't keep pretending. These choices are simple. They're layered. They carry history, fear, love, trauma, hope. Every time a decision is made for the good of someone else, we need to ask, was that person heard? Were they informed? Were they part of it? Or just the subject of it? Because stories like mine, and perhaps like yours, are more than anecdotes. They're reflections of a deeper societal challenge. How do we age with voice, not just with years? How do we keep our relationships tender and honest, even when the roles begin to shift? How do we maintain the delicate balance between offering help and preserving agency? I know it's not always easy. There are days when I question myself, wondering if I'm being too sensitive, too resistant, too set in my ways. But then I remember, having lived for decades doesn't make me less qualified to choose. In fact, it makes my choices richer, more grounded. Experience is not a liability, it's a compass. And we need to start trusting that again, in ourselves, and in those we love. If any of this resonates with you, if you've lived a version of this, from either side, write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." Because sometimes, knowing we're not alone, is the very first step toward rewriting the story. And from here, there's still something essential I want to share with you. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because at the core of everything we've been talking about, there's a question that doesn't leave us easily. It sits quietly in the background, almost unspoken, but always there, shaping our choices, our silences, our hesitations. That question is, what would I do if it were me? And not just in theory, but in the most intimate, real sense. If the person I love, a parent, a partner, a friend, started showing signs of needing help, where would I draw the line between protecting and imposing, between caring for and caring with? That's where things get messy. Because love is rarely neat. It's layered with old memories, unfinished conversations, unspoken fears. We all want to do the right thing. But the truth is, sometimes we don't even know what right looks like. We're guided by instincts, urgency, sometimes by guilt. We act fast, because it feels like we don't have time to stop and ask, But that rush often leaves something important behind, the voice of the person at the center of it all. I've heard many people say, "I just wanted to help," and I believe them. Truly, the intention behind the act is rarely malicious, but intention doesn't cancel out the impact. And when the impact is silence, when someone feels stripped of choice, overlooked, bypassed, the damage doesn't always show up as conflict. It shows up in more subtle ways, in withdrawal, in that forced smile, in the small resignation of someone who's learned not to speak up anymore because it doesn't change anything. That's what we need to unpack. That's the truth hiding behind so many well-meaning actions, that sometimes, in the name of love, we unintentionally shut down the very connection we're trying to protect. It's not easy to admit, especially when you're doing everything out of care, especially when you're exhausted from trying to keep everything together. But this moment of reflection isn't about blame. It's about awareness, about recognizing that how we care matters just as much as why we care. Because real love invites, it doesn't trap. It opens space, even when it's hard. It makes room for uncertainty, for disagreement, for growth, and maybe this is the biggest transformation we need to embrace. Understanding that protecting someone doesn't mean controlling every part of their life, that safety can be built through mutual trust, not constant surveillance. That sometimes, the most powerful act of love is letting someone stumble, choose, change their mind, and still be right there beside them, not above them. I wonder, have you ever been on either side of this? Have you ever felt torn between wanting to help and not wanting to overstep? Or maybe you've felt your voice being softened, like your decisions are gently redirected until they're no longer really yours. If you're honest with yourself, where do you draw the line? What are the boundaries that still honor connection without erasing individuality? Because this isn't just about the elderly, it's about all of us, about the human need to be seen, heard, respected, no matter our age, our condition, our limitations. It's about asking, what kind of relationships are we building, and what kind of legacy do we want to leave in how we treat one another? The people we care for are not projects, they're people, with stories, with preferences, with dreams that didn't disappear just because the calendar turned another year. They still have desires. They still want to feel in charge of their lives, and we owe it to them, and to ourselves, to not forget that. So, I leave you with this question. If it were you, how far would you go to care for someone you love? And just as importantly, how would you want them to care for you? Write this in the comments if it resonates with you. This makes me think. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the more we explore it, the more we realize how layered this whole idea of care really is. It's not just about actions, it's about intentions, boundaries, mutual trust, and the often invisible tension between love and fear. When someone steps into the role of caregiver, especially within the family, it's rarely just a role, it becomes a full-blown identity. And with that identity comes a complex mix of responsibility, guilt, anxiety, and sometimes control disguised as protection. But here's the truth I wish more people said out loud. Even with the best of intentions, care without consent is still a form of pressure. And over time, pressure becomes silence. Silence becomes distance. And distance, well, it's the one thing none of us really want when we're trying to care for each other. I've heard stories that mirror mine in surprising ways. Friends whose grown children put cameras in their homes without asking first, just for safety. Grandparents handed smartwatches that track every move, every heartbeat, every breath, because we're worried about you. Some accept it without a word. Others feel deeply violated but don't say anything, because they don't want to come across as difficult, or worse, ungrateful. That quiet acceptance, it can wear down your sense of self, slowly and painfully. The desire to be seen as capable doesn't disappear with age. It grows louder, even if it's spoken in smaller, more subtle ways. In the choice to cook your own meal, even if it takes twice as long. In the walk to the corner store, even if your legs ache halfway. In saying no, thank you, even when your family insists it would be so much easier if they just did it for you. Autonomy isn't stubbornness, it's identity. And when we take that away, even gently, even lovingly, we're not just helping someone, we might be unintentionally erasing them. That's the part people don't talk about enough. The emotional cost, the invisible trade-off between efficiency and dignity. And it's not only the elderly who feel it, caregivers do too. I've spoken to so many sons and daughters, overwhelmed by guilt, carrying the weight of making the right decisions, terrified of doing too little or going too far. That's the paradox, isn't it? You want to protect your loved one from harm, but who's protecting them from losing themselves in the process? This is why conversations, real, open, sometimes uncomfortable ones, are so necessary. And I don't just mean asking how are you feeling today. I mean pulling up a chair, looking each other in the eye, and asking, what kind of help feels good to you? What makes you feel respected? Where do you need more space? What are you afraid I might not understand? These are the questions that build bridges, not walls. Because care without connection can easily become controlled. But care built on trust, that's something sacred. Let's not forget the emotional layers that surround these choices. Sometimes the person offering care is still healing from their own wounds, unresolved family dynamics, past neglect, or the fear of not being enough, and the person receiving care may be grappling with shame, pride, or the quiet grief of losing certain freedoms. When we meet each other in that space, with gentleness and honesty, something powerful happens. The conversation shifts from doing for someone to being with them. So many people are living in this tension right now. Not just one or two families, but thousands. Quiet stories, hidden behind curtains, whispered in kitchens, buried under layers of we're just trying to help, but we need to name it. We need to normalize talking about it. Because the more we speak up, the more we give each other permission to be human, to make mistakes, to ask questions, to set boundaries, and to change our minds along the way. Care doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it's a hand reaching out, sometimes it's a step back, sometimes it's a long pause before saying, okay, I trust you. And all of that is valid. All of that is love. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where love, fear, and control got tangled together, if you've ever felt torn between keeping someone safe and giving them room to breathe, know that you're not alone. These are deeply human questions. They require compassion, not just for others, but for ourselves too. We won't always get it right, but we can keep showing up, keep listening, keep learning. That's how care evolves. That's how relationships grow. That's how healing begins. And maybe, just maybe, the most powerful form of love isn't about fixing everything. Maybe it's about saying, I'm here. I see you. I respect the way you want to live, even when it's scary, even when it's inconvenient, even when it means letting go just a little. So if you've ever been on either side of this experience, as someone who gives care, or someone who receives it, and you've had to ask yourself, am I crossing a line, or am I still being seen for who I am? I want to invite you into this conversation. Share your story, your questions, your fears. Write in the comments. Privacy is care, too. I'd truly love to know what you think. And if you're still here with me, it probably means this topic touched something real in you too. Maybe it awakened memories, reflections, or even a desire to do things differently, whether in the way you care or in the way you allow yourself to be cared for. And that's already a big step. If this content made you think, brought you clarity, or, in some way, truly accompanied you on this journey so far, then it's worth subscribing to the channel. Because this conversation doesn't end now, it continues, grows, deepens, and having you around makes all the difference. Take the opportunity to leave a comment here just so I know you made it to the end, right? I'm with you until the end. It'll be great to see who walked with me this far. Oh, and if this video made sense to you, if it gave you that feeling of wow, this is what I needed to hear today, leave a like too. Not only because it helps the channel, but because it shows that this connection here is worth it. And look, there's a video here that complements this subject in a way that you'll enjoy. Click and continue with me there. The conversation continues, and there's a lot of good stuff for us to discover together.